Chapter 2451. When Zhou Chongguang returned to the bedroom, it was almost time. It was mainly because Qin Mu's period had come for a few days, and he hadn't hugged her for a week. Tonight, he had accumulated a lot. This was all thanks to his mother. The old woman was anxious to have a grandson, so she kept sending him supplements. Some of them were cooked, but Qin Mu didn't want to eat them, and he didn't want her to think too much, so most of them went into his stomach. He was at the age of youth, and he had taken so many supplements, so his demand was naturally great. Moreover, he was also very interested in his wife. Usually, he would not miss her for 5 days a week. After a week, he had long been unable to bear it. He pulled her into his arms and lay quietly. He was also thinking about something in his heart, and he only felt that the time was very good. Qin Mu hadn't fallen asleep yet. Smelling his scent, she propped her head up and asked, "You didn't take any precautions tonight, did you?" Zhou Chongguang poked her forehead in amusement. "Don't you know whether I'm useful or not?" "I was dizzy, so I didn't pay attention," she said honestly. Zhou Chongguang couldn't help saying, "The touch is different, right?" Qin Mu yawned and said, "There's no difference." She finally fell asleep because of exhaustion, leaving Zhou Chongguang in a mess. How could it be the same? How could he be the same as a man-made product? He really wanted to wake her up and let her feel the difference. But seeing that she was sleepy, he still couldn't bear to, so he kissed her lightly and whispered, "Go to sleep, Mumu." The next day was Saturday, and Zhou Chongguang didn't need to go to work, so he could naturally sleep with his wife for a while. He didn't wake up until 9 o'clock. He opened his eyes and looked at Qin Mu. She was still asleep. She was probably exhausted these days. Tang Sher was pregnant, and many things at the wedding were done by Mumu himself. He felt a little sorry for her when he saw her tired at night. He knew that part of the reason she worked so hard was because of her guilt. He didn't feel guilty at first, but he felt guilty because of his wife. She shouldn't have to bear this. Luckily, the one raised by Yi Muyun's family was a silly and adorable fellow that didn't hold a grudge. Now, the two young ladies were as good as before. When he saw that Qin Mu was happy, he let her be. It was just that he would be her chauffeur every day. Downstairs, there was a voice. He recognized his mother's voice, so he got up quietly. He didn't disturb Qin Mu, so he put on a nightgown and went downstairs. Mother Zhou was making soup downstairs. It was very nutritious, and when she saw Zhou Chongguang coming down, she glanced at him. "It's so late, Qin Mu still hasn't woken up, right?" Zhou Chongguang smiled lazily. "Not yet. His brother got married yesterday, so we came back a little late." Although he said so, Zhou Chongguang's mother was experienced. She knew what was going on when she saw her son's face, so she snorted and said, "Qin Mu must be tired because of you." Then, while making the soup, she seemed to be talking to herself. "Take it easy. I heard that if you want to have children, you can't sleep with each other every day." Zhou Chongguang couldn't help interrupting his mother. "Mom, I told you, we don't want children for the time being." "If you don't want children, how are you going to make medicine for Qin Mu to recuperate?" Zhou Chongguang's mother put down the soup in her hand and looked serious. "Don't say no. Don't tell me that it's a tonic. I'm old, but I'm not stupid." Chapter 2452. Mum, Qin Mu's menstrual cycle is a little irregular. If she adjusts it, it might not be so painful in the future. Mama Zhou poked him. "You only know how to dote on your wife." But she still forced a smile. "Anyway, I don't care. You have to get pregnant within a year, or else, just adopt one?" Zhou Chongguang knew that he was trying to sound her out, but he deliberately said it casually. Mama Zhou glanced at him. "Of course, you can adopt one if you can't give birth. But she's still young, so she has to work hard." "Chongguang, your wife doesn't want to have children?" "No." Zhou Chongguang coaxed his mother and smiled. "How can that be? Qin Mu likes children." Mama Zhou was comforted. "That's good. I'm most afraid that your wife will be too delicate and not want to give birth. Now that you said that she likes children, that's good. It's just a minor illness, and it will be fine after some treatment." Then, she warned her son, "You have to be gentle with women. Don't spoil Qin Mu's body, understand?" Zhou Chongguang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "How can I spoil her?" Then, he coughed. "Qin Mu's body is quite soft." Mama Zhou laughed and hit him. "Don't be serious. Only Qin Mu can forgive you for those ridiculous things in the past," she sighed. "Treat her well in the future. There's no rush in having a child. Qin Mu is only 22 years old, right? She'll only be 23 during the new year. There will be plenty of opportunities." Zhou Chongguang laughed and didn't say anything more. At this moment, he looked up unexpectedly and saw Qin Mu standing in the middle of the second floor, looking at them quietly. He didn't know how long she had been standing there, watching and listening. He panicked. He was afraid that she would overthink, so he walked over quickly and said softly, "Why are you awake? You'll catch a cold if you wear so little." Qin Mu's calm face squeezed out a smile. "I heard you talking to Mom, so I came down to take a look." As she said that, she called out to Mama Zhou. Mama Zhou was quite satisfied. She had thought things through recently and was in a good mood. She found Qin Mu pleasing to the eye in every aspect. Even though Qin Mu was pampered, she still respected her elders. She didn't lose any face in front of her friends and family. Her only wish was to have a grandson. Granddaughter was fine too. It didn't matter if it was a man or a woman. Qin Mu retracted his gaze and looked at Zhou Chongguang, asking in a low voice, "Did I prepare more supplements for you?" Seeing her normal expression, Zhou Chongguang also breathed a sigh of relief, smiled and pinched her little face. "Originally is your tonic, have the nerve to say." Qin Mu imitated him and lowered his voice, "But if you drink it, I'll be the unlucky one." Mu was, and she. Qin, and, Qin. With that, she turned around and ran. Zhou Chongguang's heart couldn't take it anymore. He didn't care if his mother was around or what she had just said. He grabbed Qin Mu and dragged her upstairs. He raised his head and said to his mother, "Mom, we'll come down in an hour for lunch. Make more soup, I need to nourish myself." When Qin Mu heard that, she wanted to dig a hole in the ground. He was too shameless. And, this was, too much. Everyone in the villa would know what they were up to. Besides, she was shameless to do that in front of her mother-in-law. How was she going to face her mother-in-law in the future? But Mr. Zhou didn't care. She was the one who flirted with him. He had to destroy it. Chapter 2453. Qin Mu was helpless. She could only lean against his handsome face and say in a low voice, "If your mother is here, she will have a problem with me." Zhou Chongguang's eyes were tinged with a hint of a smile. His body hung above her, and he seemed to be thinking for a while before saying, "Then I'll let you go, and I'll double the compensation tonight, okay?" Qin Mu nibbled his chin with some disdain. "You do it every day, Zhou Chongguang. Are you tired of it?" Zhou Chongguang chuckled. "Of course not." As he said, he moved closer to her ear, his breath erratic. "I'll never get tired of it." Qin Mu rolled her eyes at him and pushed him. "Be serious. Go down, or your mother will really think that we're doing something up there." "It doesn't matter what we're doing. My mother will be happy to see it happen." Zhou Chongguang nibbled her neck carefully. After a while, he probably felt that he had teased her enough, so he propped himself up and patted her little face. "Then I'll go down first. Come down after you wash up. Remember to wear more clothes, okay?" As he said that, he got out of bed and walked to the changing room. Soon, he changed into a set of home clothes. Qin Mu lay down and calmed down. When he passed by, he came over and pinched her little face again. Qin Mu made a face at him. Zhou Chongguang smiled and went downstairs in a good mood. Of course, he drank the tonic soup that his mother specially made for him. He knew that Qin Mu didn't like it, so he drank her share too. Qin Mu's body was cold, so she couldn't tolerate these yang tonics. He didn't want to tell his mother directly, so he drank it all himself. There were several times when Zhou Zong had a nosebleed, but he was willing to drink it. When Mrs. Zhou turned around, she found that her son had finished the tonics. She patted his hand. "You finished it for your wife again." Zhou Chongguang elegantly touched his lower lip. "It's quite delicious." "I didn't notice it." Mother Zhou glanced at him. "How could you not notice? You clearly did it on purpose." Zhou Chongguang smiled and said, "Mom, don't do these things in the future. I don't need them, and Mumu doesn't like them." Mother Zhou was silent for a while and nodded. "Okay, I will come less in the future." "That's not what I meant." Zhou Chongguang sighed softly and said, "When you're free, you should come here often. Mumu also likes your cooking." Mother Zhou's eyes turned red. "You only know how to coax me." "Of course not." Zhou Chongguang laughed. "It's true. Mumu loves it very much." As he spoke, he looked upstairs. "I'll go see why she hasn't come down yet." Mother Zhou also urged him. "It's been a long time. Quickly go and see if he's feeling unwell." Thinking back to the joke that her son had made just now, it was probably because his wife was embarrassed and refused to come down because she was shy. Zhou Chongguang smiled and walked up the stairs slowly. He had a feeling that Qin Mu had heard what they had said. In the master bedroom, Qin Mu was half lying in the bathtub. She looked up at the crystal lamp above her head in a daze. Yes, she had heard it. She had heard Zhou Chongguang's mother say that she wanted grandchildren. She had also heard them say that there was a small problem with her body. Zhou Chongguang said that she was recuperating. The Chinese medicine that she had taken that was difficult to swallow was to recuperate her body. If it was just a small problem, why didn't he tell her? Instead, he told her that they would have children a few years later. He said that he wanted to play for a few more years. Chapter 2454. Qin was in a mess. If they hadn't reconciled, it wouldn't have mattered if she couldn't have children. But now, she had an indescribable feeling. She saw him speaking up for her in front of his mother, negotiating for her, and even hiding it from her. All of this could be said to make her feel that his love for her was real. She also believed that even if they didn't have children, he would always be good to her. But Qin didn't think that she would be willing to watch the mother and son argue about having children forever. She didn't dare to think about it. If her body really needed a long time to recuperate, then what would their marriage become? Would Zhou Chongguang's love for her be twisted? Could she still love him like before? Qin knew that she wasn't a person who could be wronged. At least, she wouldn't be wronged for the rest of her life. It wasn't her fault that she couldn't have children, but if she couldn't have children, it would be her fault in front of Mother Zhou. Her heart was in a mess. In the end, she closed her eyes slightly and refused to think about it. Zhou Chongguang stood at the door for a long time, looking at her in a daze. She didn't even realize that he had been standing there for a long time. She heard it. But at this moment, Zhou Chongguang didn't want to expose her because his mother was here. He didn't want to talk to her about this now. He still firmly believed that he shouldn't drag the elderly into the matters between husband and wife. In the future, he would take time to travel abroad with Qin. It could be considered a form of relaxation. He walked over slowly and didn't wake her up until he squatted at the edge of the bathtub. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Her voice was a little hoarse. Zhou Chongguang, why are you out of practice again? He put his hand into the water and then frowned. The water is getting cold. You'll catch a cold. So he grabbed a bath towel, picked her up with one hand, and wrapped her in the bath towel. He carried her straight into the master bedroom. She was obviously still absent-minded. He sighed softly. After all, she was only 22 years old. There were many things that couldn't be hidden, but they still showed. He gave up on letting her go downstairs. Instead, he pressed her forehead and coaxed her in a low voice. If you're not feeling well, just lie down here. I'll make some porridge for you, okay? At this time, Qin is also very afraid to meet Mother Zhou. She doesn't know how to deal with it. She is still not used to disguise herself. Thus, he nodded. Yes, my head is a little dizzy. He smiled in understanding, but there was a trace of bitterness in his heart. Qin must be feeling terrible right now, but he didn't know how to tell her. Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little heavy, but it returned to normal after he went downstairs. Mother Zhou looked at him. Is your wife really not feeling well? It's a little hot, probably because I didn't control myself last night. Zhou Chongguang took the initiative to carry the pot and then went to make porridge. Mother Zhou looked at him and sighed in her heart. Although the two of them didn't have any children, their feelings for each other weren't wrong. Moreover, Chongguang had completely taken care of his family now. He wasn't like the past, where he didn't have a home and couldn't see anyone. Now, he seemed to have returned to his previous self. Mother Zhou's heart was filled with emotions and joy. She originally wanted to go upstairs to see Qin, but she felt that it was a little inappropriate. So she told her son a few words. If the medicine doesn't work, you have to see a doctor. Chapter 2455. Mrs. Zhou said seriously again, you have to control yourself. You used to be crazy at such a young age, but now you're even crazier. Zhou Chongguang smiled. Then why did you send me supplements? Mrs. Zhou glanced at him. It's my fault. You're the one who didn't control yourself. Zhou Chongguang just smiled and opened the door for his mother to get in the car. Watching the black RV slowly drive away, he breathed a sigh of relief. He had finally sent her away. Then, he quickly returned to the kitchen. The porridge was ready. He filled a bowl and brought it upstairs. Qin leaned against the headboard and said softly, has your mother gone back? He nodded and walked over gently. He put down the tray and sat by the bed. He reached out and touched her head. She told me to control myself and not to tire you out. Qin face was slightly red. She looked at him and her lips moved. Zhou Chongguang knew what she wanted to say, so he stopped her and brought the porridge over. Eat something first. Then, he added, Mumu, we have a lifetime to talk about it, understand? A lifetime? Qin was a little stunned for a moment, and then she was scalded. Zhou Chongguang reached out and said, spit it out if it's hot. Qin eyes were filled with tears. She looked at him eagerly, but she still couldn't accept it. He didn't think it was dirty, but she thought it was too strange. So her little face wrinkled and twisted. Zhou Chongguang looked at her helplessly and found it funny. She had probably never been so embarrassed before. When she finally swallowed it, he reached out and patted her. It's so big, but it's still scalded. There was an indescribable love in his tone. When Qin heard this, her little mouth flattened. She stared at him pitifully as her tears fell one by one into the bowl. Zhou Chongguang looked at her little face, his expression as deep as water. He gently stroked her little face with his fingers and asked very softly, "Why are you crying? Do you think my porridge is not delicious?" Qin Mu shook her head. He took the porridge to the side and pulled her into his embrace with one hand. She was very thin, and nestled in his broad embrace, she seemed especially small. After hugging her for a while, he asked in a hoarse voice, "What's wrong?" Qin Mu bit her lip, buried her head in his shoulder, and smelled his pleasant scent. "Zhou Chongguang, can I not have children?" There was something deep in Zhou Chongguang's eyes, but he didn't let her see his expression. Instead, he continued in a gentle voice, "How could that be? Mumu, you're still so young. Didn't I say to wait for a few more years?" She hugged his neck with her little hands, raised her head, and looked at him very seriously. "Then what was the medicine I drank?" Little by little, Zhou Chongguang's eyes started to tear up. He knew that even if he didn't say it, she would still ask Qin Chen or even Dr. Bai. She would eventually find out. So, he loosened up a little and hugged her intimately as if he was hugging a baby. His voice was calm. "Your body is a little cold, so the chances of you getting pregnant are lower. That's why I want to adjust your body. Otherwise, it won't be good if you give birth to a child." He said it very casually, but Qin Mu didn't quite believe him, because he didn't answer her question directly. However, if she continued to ask, he would have to say the result, and it would seem that she was being unreasonable. Chapter 2456. Qin Mu looked down and didn't continue asking. She just grunted and squeezed out a smile. "I want to eat porridge." "You're already in tears and you still want to eat it?" He laughed. "It's too salty. I'll get another bowl." She grabbed his hand. "No need, I'm not afraid of salty food." After she said that, Zhou Chongguang bit her little ear and said passionately, "You like salty food, huh?" Qin Mu was speechless. At a time like this, he could actually have such thoughts. However, she also knew that he was probably trying to move her thoughts away. Thus, she placed her little face on his shoulder and vaguely gave a sound of agreement. Although he didn't do anything, Zhou Zong's heart was rippling. He wanted to do something, but now wasn't a good time, so he had to bear with it no matter what. Qin Mu obediently ate a bowl of porridge. She was pretending to be sick, but after eating a bowl of porridge, she really broke out in a sweat and fell asleep. Zhou Chongguang wiped her body with a hot towel again. After she fell asleep, he took his laptop and kept her company while he dealt with his work. When Qin Mu woke up, it was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as she woke up, Zhou Chongguang closed his laptop and walked over to kiss her little face. He said softly, "You're awake." Qin Mu grunted and looked around. Seeing his laptop, she hugged him. "You've been here the whole time." "Yeah," he said mildly. "I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to find me when you woke up." Qin Mu hugged him softly like a little lamb. After a while, she said softly, "I want to take a shower." He grunted. "I'll carry you there. We'll go out to eat later, huh?" Qin Mu didn't want to go out at first, but he seemed to be in high spirits, so she nodded. "Okay. Let's go to Zhao Yan's restaurant," he said casually. Qin Mu glanced at him. "Childish." Zhou Chongguang chuckled. "Won't you make me jealous?" He carried Qin Mu to take a shower, but she remembered something and bit her lip. "I don't think I've taken my medicine today." When she spoke, her expression was cautious. His heart ached a little. Because she was afraid of taking this medicine, she refused to take it before, but now, she took the initiative to want to take the medicine. Her heart must be uncomfortable. Zhou Chongguang lowered his head and rubbed her little head with his forehead. His voice was extremely gentle. "Mumu, we won't take medicine today. I'll take you to have a big meal, okay?" She hugged his neck. How could she not know what he was thinking? She said softly, "Zhou Chongguang, I'm fine." With that, she lowered her eyes and said in a very low voice, "I want a child." She looked up at him and said again, "I want to have a child with you. Zhou Chongguang, I want to give it a try." His heart suddenly became wet. He pressed hard against her little face and sighed. Silly Mumu. How could she be so silly? It was clearly him who was so bad. What was she thinking now? He lowered his head and said softly, "Mumu, we can take it easy about the child. If it really doesn't work, we can adopt it. Don't be too stressed." Qin Mu bit her lip and looked at him tenderly like a little animal. "Really?" Zhou Chongguang smiled. "Of course it's true." Chapter 2457. Qin Mu sighed. "Will your mother agree?" "I'll convince her." He kissed the corner of her mouth again. "Of course, I think 3 years is enough for us to have a child." For some reason, Zhou Chongguang had a strong feeling that he and Qin Mu would have a child. He could feel it. Of course, he didn't tell her that if his mother hadn't found out about Qin Mu's problem, he would have said that it was his own problem. But now it was too late. Although Qin Mu's conversation with him seemed to have calmed her down, she also felt that her physical problem was not as easy as he said. However, she didn't ask further. He was not willing to give up, so she was willing to cooperate and give him a child. If there was no fate, she thought they might be able to adopt 1 or 2 children. Zhou Chongguang put Qin Mu down and said hoarsely, "You take a shower first. I'll wait for you outside." However, Qin Mu reached out and hugged him, unwilling to let go. His other slender arm turned on the shower head, and instantly, warm water splashed down. Zhou Chongguang's clothes were neat and tidy, but in an instant, he was completely drenched. He looked at her. On the other hand, Qin Mu was like a little demoness as she unbuttoned his shirt. Her voice was so soft and tender that it could take one's life. "The clothes are all wet. Zhou Chongguang, do you want to wash together?" He couldn't help laughing. When he opened his mouth, his voice was extremely hoarse. "Mrs. Zhou is so enthusiastic." "Of course." With that, he leaned over and kissed her lips. His big palm took her little hand down, and his action was extremely aggressive. She was the one who caused the fire, but at this time, her little hand was trembling terribly. "Are you afraid?" Zhou Chongguang's voice was also extremely hot, and even a little shaky. "I will teach you." He had always been in charge of the affairs between them, and he was reluctant to teach her those things. However, he was a man after all. Sometimes, he would step out of line, like now, when his little wife took the initiative. As a result, the entanglement in the bathroom didn't end until 5 o'clock. Qin Mu's legs were weak, but Zhou Chongguang was still very energetic, as if he could come again. Qin Mu punched his shoulder and complained, "Where did your mother get this tonic? It's so powerful." His face sank on her shoulder and he chuckled. "Mumu, you've begged me time and time again. I don't need any supplements." Qin Mu reached out and hit him. He chuckled, but finally let her go. When they left, it was already 7 o'clock. It was cold at night, so he wrapped her up tightly. He wore a white down jacket and a red scarf, revealing only his eyes. There was no way to go to the restaurant, so in the end, they decided to walk to a nearby restaurant for dinner. Zhou Chongguang held her hand, like an old couple, warm and peaceful. On the way, many people looked at them enviously. They both looked good, especially Zhou Chongguang, who was wearing a dark gray coat and a light brown sweater inside. He looked handsome and cold. Qin Mu looked much more easygoing, but her figure was there, and she was the highlight of any crowd. Her long hair was tied in a ponytail, and she looked pure and cute. Many college students looked at her. Zhou Chongguang was a little jealous. He reached out and pinched her little face. "Mrs. Zhou, you've actually been married for 4 years." Chapter 24:58. Zhou Chongguang lowered his head slightly and pressed his lips against her forehead. He lowered his voice and said, "I should dress you up in the future. That way, you won't have to provoke little boys." Qin Mu smiled happily. "Zhou Chongguang, are you jealous?" "Yes." He sighed and said, "I'm jealous, Mrs. Zhou, if this makes you feel happy." Qin Mu laughed. Then, he took off his scarf. His lips came up to hers and he kissed her cherishly. As he pecked her little mouth, he said softly, "I still feel very excited when an old couple kisses. What about you, Mumu?" Qin Mu hugged his waist and lowered her eyes. Her breathing was a little chaotic. "Me too." As soon as she finished speaking, he kissed her deeply and deepened the kiss. In the distance, someone was setting off fireworks. The fireworks were set off in the night sky, adding some warmth to the cold night. Under the fire, he held her little face and kissed her deeply. "Mumu, no matter what, don't let go of my hand." After the kiss, he pressed his forehead against hers and murmured. It was a promise, but also a request. Qin Mu's little hand slowly climbed over and clasped his fingers tightly. Sometimes, love was so simple. They fell in love, after 4 years of not very good marriage, after she was disappointed in him. Their fingers were clasped together, so it was not so cold. Later, he did not let go of her little hand. He kept holding her little hand to eat a simple dinner and watched a movie like an ordinary couple. Qin Mu cried several times when she saw Li Fangfang's nothing to ask. Zhou Chongguang kept handing her tissues. Later, he simply hugged her in his arms and coaxed her. When she cried, he could wipe her tears with his sleeve, or he could kiss them away. This kind of sweetness surpassed that of a newlywed. When they left the theater, Qin Mu was still immersed in the plot. Zhou Chongguang hugged his little wife and said with a chuckle, "Children have a low threshold for tears. You're cold-blooded." Qin Mu snorted softly, "Merchants are all cold-blooded." "All right, I'm cold-blooded. I'll warm you up tonight." He chuckled and reached out to hold her little hand. Qin Mu's face turned red. He really did not give up on taking advantage of her for even a moment. The two of them walked home for about half an hour. After walking for about 10 minutes, Qin Mu made a fuss about wanting to call a taxi. Zhou Chongguang, on the other hand, was rather fond of this peaceful time alone. In the end, he had no choice but to piggyback his young lady. Qin Mu was quite happy. Lying on his back, she was as curious as a little girl. Zhou Chongguang laughed at her. Qin Mu, you must have been unpopular at home before. No. Qin Mu wrinkled her nose. It's because we have too many children in our family. She counted. Big brother is not alone, me, Qin Mo, Anlin, and Lan. Zhou Chongguang was about to faint when he heard this. By the way, aren't you and Qin Mo compatriots? Why did it become Qin Chen? Qin Mu paused for a moment before saying, Qin Chen is an Lan, he is abroad and hasn't come back. As for the middle, she couldn't explain it for a while. The outside world always thought that Qin Chen and she were twins, but in fact, they were not. She and Qin Mo were. But after a long time, their children also thought that this was the case. It was mainly Lan? Qin Yun. Chapter 2459. Zhou Chongguang heard the sigh in her tone, so he softened his voice and said, Tell me when you have the chance in the future, okay? Qin Mu nodded and leaned on his shoulder again. She said with a chuckle, Old Ma, hurry up. He couldn't help laughing and reached out to pat her butt. You know how to command people, don't you? It's obviously Old Ma. She leaned on his shoulder and smiled happily. At this time, there were still some fireworks going off in the distance, which made her little face bright and very beautiful. Zhou Chongguang was so angry that he leaned over and kissed her. Qin Mu also let him kiss her generously, because she was afraid that he wouldn't carry her and wanted to put her down. After carrying her like this for half an hour, he finally carried her home. He put her down in the courtyard, where the lights above were a little dim. Mumu, have you gained some confidence in me tonight? Zhou Chongguang took her little hand and didn't let her go home immediately. Qin Mu blinked and pretended to be stupid. You have good stamina. Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little reproachful. Qin Mu smiled and looked at him. I know. Zhou Chongguang, I said I wouldn't give up easily. She held his hand. If you don't let go, I won't let go. His eyes were a little deep, and he looked at her without saying a word. Qin Mu did the same. Their eyes met. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Okay. Mumu, remember what you said. He led her upstairs. It was already 11 o'clock. When they returned to the bedroom, he asked her to rest first and he had something urgent to deal with. In fact, at 8 o'clock, Zhao Zi had urged him lightly, but he had been ignoring him. Qin Mu looked at him and grunted in acknowledgement. Zhou Chongguang kissed her forehead. I'm going to the study. I'll be back in a while. Qin Mu nodded obediently and even hugged and kissed him. Zhou Chongguang's eyes were full of tenderness. He reached out and rubbed her long hair. If you're sleepy, you can sleep first, okay? Qin Mu softly agreed. Seeing her like this, he simply didn't want to leave. However, Zhao Zi had called him more than 10 times, so he had to reply. With great difficulty, he finally left the master bedroom and hurried to the study, closing the door behind him. He dialed Zhao Zi's cell phone. After a while, the call went through. After Zhao Zi said something, Zhou Chongguang's cell phone slipped from his hand. Chongguang, I'm not sure yet. Zhao Zi was still talking, but Zhou Chongguang could no longer hear him. After a long time, he picked up his phone. Fortunately, Zhao Zi was still there. Zhou Chongguang's voice was low. Help me investigate. Also, don't tell anyone. Zhao Zi nodded. All right. After hanging up, Zhou Chongguang fell into deep thought. He smoked one cigarette after another until his nerves were almost numb. His heart was in so much pain. When he returned to the bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, Qin Mu was already asleep. She was lying on her side, hugging his pillow. Her little face was buried and she looked very dependent on him. She was still young and still looked like a little wife. Especially since he had been pampering her recently, her skin had become much fairer and more tender, making her look even younger. Zhou Chongguang walked over lightly and sat down beside her, pursing his thin lips. He didn't do anything but just sat beside her and watched, as if she would fly away in the blink of an eye. Chapter 2460. He was not in the mood, but he still took a shower and brushed his teeth carefully, because she liked to be clean. After lying on the bed, he pulled the pillow away from her hand and held her carefully in his arms. This was the woman he loved and wanted to be good to for the rest of his life. He looked at her and said in a low and hoarse voice, Mumu, if I don't let go of your hand, you won't let go either, okay? However, Qin Mu had been asleep, so she probably couldn't hear him. He looked at her until dawn, and then he took a nap for 2 hours. When Qin Mu woke up, she smelled the smell of Chinese medicine and instinctively wanted to vomit. She hated the smell so much, but Zhou Chongguang spent an hour making medicine for her every day, rain or shine. No matter how much she didn't want to drink it, she had to pinch her nose and drink it for the sake of his hard work. Moreover, she wanted to have a child with him now. Qin Mu wanted to get up, but Zhou Chongguang had already come upstairs with the medicine. Qin Mu pinched her nose and said in a low voice, "It looks so bitter." Her voice was small and soft, like that of a little sheep. The bitterness in Zhou Chongguang's heart was blown away a little. He stood at the door and smiled. "Didn't you want to drink it yesterday? Now that it's done, you think it's bitter." He walked over, put the medicine aside, and then took out 2 plums. "Eat one first, and then drink it later, okay?" Qin Mu looked at him with her bright eyes. "Where did you get it?" "Old Chen wants it. He loves his wife, so he always buys some." Zhou Chongguang said, "I'll buy 2 caddies for you later." Qin Mu ate one. Although it was a little sour, it tasted much better than the medicine. As she ate, she looked at him and said with some disdain, "Don't learn from my brother's bad habits. Why do you have to call him brother? You're a pervert." She unconsciously said bad things about her brother. Zhou Chongguang smiled and pushed her long hair back. "See, now that you've married into the Zhou family, you're finally not on the same side as Yi Muyun. Ever since he shamelessly came to the Tang family, he's no longer on the same side as me." Qin Mu suddenly turned into a child as she excitedly said, "Zhou Chongguang, you must not know this, right? Big brother wanted to be the Tang family's son-in-law at the age of 10. He ran to Uncle Tang himself and asked him to raise him." As she spoke, she laughed. "You don't know how black my father's face was at that time. He said that others would laugh at him, Qin Anlin, for not being able to raise a child." Zhou Chongguang laughed along with her. "What happened next? Tang, you agreed just like that?" "Yes." Qin Mu nodded. "My brother has been black-bellied since he was a child. Uncle Tang probably saw his potential before. Think about it now. Big brother has worked so hard for the Tang family. I heard that he returned all his shares to share when they got married." As she spoke, Mrs. Zhou looked at Mr. Zhou sympathetically. "Including the 5% you gave me." Zhou Chongguang did not mind and chuckled. "It's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Besides, Tang's share and it's all in the past. Nothing happened between us." Qin Mu sneered. "Some people seem to have forgotten their dark history. Have they forgotten how shamelessly they followed me to New York?" "Mrs. Zhou, you're young and ignorant." Zhou Chongguang laughed. "Also, you should take your medicine. You're talking nonsense. Do you think you don't need to take your medicine?" Chapter 2461. "I have to be stricter with a little kid like you." Zhou Chongguang coaxed her and fed her one mouthful at a time. Although Qin Mu was unwilling, she pinched her nose and drank the plum in one go after thinking about it. "Baby, you're great." He opened his hands and peeled the plum for her to eat. Qin Mu couldn't stand him anymore and glared at him. "Don't do that to my brother. I'm not eating it." "Then which style do you like?" Zhou Chongguang pinched her little face. Qin Mu slapped his hand away, blushing. Zhou Chongguang leaned over and kissed her deeply, sharing the taste of the medicine in her mouth with her. At first, Qin Mu was a little resistant. It wasn't good, but she couldn't reject him when he kissed her deeply. She could only accept his kiss helplessly. Again and again. After the kiss, he kissed her little face again. "I'll wait for you downstairs. I'll send you to see the gallery later, okay?" Qin Mu nodded. "Okay." She looked quite obedient. He couldn't help but touch her little face again and go down first. However, the moment he turned around, his face darkened slightly. He walked downstairs slowly and prepared breakfast before Qin Mu came down. When Qin Mu came down the stairs, he still had a smile on his face. She couldn't see anything. Qin Mu bit the croissant he prepared and said calmly, "Zhou Chongguang, when do you think my brother and Cher are going to come back from their honeymoon?" Zhou Chongguang smiled. "It's just that Cher is back. She's pregnant. What do you think she can do?" Qin Mu bit her lip. "Even if she can't help, I'll take a look." After a while, she sat beside him and hugged his waist with her little hands, speaking in a low voice, "Chongguang, Cher is pregnant. It's hard for her to get pregnant as well. Now that she's pregnant, does that mean that I can get pregnant as well?" He could hear the uneasiness in her voice, as well as a little disappointment. His gaze became extremely gentle. He lowered his head and pressed it against her little face. He sighed softly. "There will be Mumu. We will definitely have children." Qin Mu nodded and sat up straight again. Her temperament had become a lot livelier recently, probably because of his excessive pampering. And he liked it very much. Zhou Chongguang waited for her to finish eating and then went outside to wait for her in the car. Women always needed to tidy up before going out. Qin Mu walked over slowly. Zhou Chongguang reached out to open the car door for her. He smiled and said, "You look beautiful today." Today, she was wearing a Chanel jacket, her brown curly hair was well combed, and her shoes were exquisite. It was rare for her to dress up like this. As Qin Mu sat in the car, he was still looking at her. "Did you tidy up because you're going out with me?" Qin Mu glanced at him, buckled her seatbelt, and smiled. "I heard that the landlord is quite handsome." "Qin Mu," Zhou Chongguang said with a hint of warning in his tone, "will he be as handsome as your husband?" Qin Mu chuckled. "You know, after being married for a long time, there's not so much novelty." She was just joking with him, but Zhou Chongguang was very fussy. He reached out and pinched her little face. "Mumu, say that you'll never leave me." Qin Mu was surprised, and then she smiled helplessly. "Zhou Chongguang, when did you become like a child? You're so fussy." But Zhou Chongguang didn't laugh. He kept looking at her. Chapter 2462. He still didn't speak. She was a little flustered and shook his arm carefully. "Zhou Chongguang." He seemed to come back to his senses. Looking at Qin Mu, he leaned over and hugged her gently. "Me too. I won't leave you." Qin Mu was thrown into his arms. Her little face rested on his shoulder and she felt his heartbeat. After a long time, he let go of her and didn't talk as much as before. It was a little silent in the car until they reached the place she chose. It was a very good location. It was located in the elite section of B City. It was a full 800 square meters, and the annual rent was probably a few million yuan. However, Zhou Chongguang didn't care about that. As long as Qin Mu was happy, it didn't matter whether he earned money or not. As Qin Mu said, the landlord was very young and very handsome. He was very much like Li Zian in Love and the Producer. In reality, he was another male version of Qin Chen, a real man. Zhou Chongguang watched his little wife socialize with other men and watched her smile and discuss things with others. In Zhou Zong's eyes, the landlord had successfully become a male mistress. Every smile, in Zhou Zong's eyes, was extremely hateful. Qin Mu occasionally saw her husband's expression and felt that he was very cute. However, she didn't pay attention to him. If he was jealous like this, she would have died a long time ago because of what he had done in the past. Qin Mu and the landlord quickly negotiated the rent. She paid a deposit of 20 yuan first, which was considered to be a deal. The rest would be paid in 2 days after the contract was drawn up. From the beginning to the end, she behaved very independently and didn't need Zhou Chongguang to show up. Gradually, Zhou Chongguang also realized this. All these years, Qin Mu had been staying at home, but she was not unfamiliar with these things in the outside world at all. This actually made Zhou Chongguang feel a sense of crisis, which meant that Qin Mu could live well without him. His back was drenched in cold sweat. After Qin Mu finished talking, she tilted her head to look at him and asked curiously, "Zhou Chongguang, what's wrong?" He forced a smile and opened the door to let her get in. After he got in the car, he smiled and said, "Nothing." Qin Mu sat beside him and said softly, "Are you under a lot of pressure?" "What?" His voice was hoarse as he tilted his head to look at her. Qin Mu smiled faintly. "I'm saying, pregnant. Don't compare yourself to your brother." "That's not what I meant." He was still looking at her with a curious expression. In the end, Qin Mu stuck out her tongue and finally said, "I mean, you're already very powerful. You don't need to feel inferior in this aspect." Zhou Chongguang's eyes were tinged with a hint of a smile, and his voice was soft, "Idiot." With that said, he pulled her into his embrace and hugged her tightly. Qin Mu could feel how much he cared for her in his embrace. Her voice was light as a feather. "Zhou Chongguang, if we can't have a child, can I be your child? I can act cute every day, and I'm not worse than Cher at all. Why are you comparing yourself to her?" He patted her back gently. "You are you, not someone else." His little fool nodded blankly and then quickly said, "I just saw that you were depressed today, so I wanted to comfort you." He reached out to touch his chin and laughed at himself. "Maybe it's early menopause?" Qin Mu understood and nodded hard. "Probably." Chapter 2463. Zhou Chongguang smiled and started the car. As he drove, he asked casually, "Are you going to your mother's place or go home first?" Qin Mu glanced at him. "I thought you would invite me to your office." Zhou Chongguang smiled and then looked at her meaningfully. "I want to check the post." Qin Mu snorted. "Why would I check the post when I'm with you? If I want to check, I should do it on my own." Zhou Chongguang was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "It won't happen again. It won't happen again." Qin Mu knew what he was talking about. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "I don't mean to bring up the past." Because she would be looking for trouble if she talked about it. Zhou Chongguang smiled. "Good girl." Qin Mu's voice suddenly became fierce. "Throw that sofa away. I don't want to see it again." He deliberately coaxed her. I'll change my office and use that place as a warehouse, okay? Qin Mu snorted and did not answer him. She didn't believe him. He only knew how to coax her. But after a while, she still said, I'll go to my mother's place. You seem to have a lot of work these days. He held the steering wheel with one hand and pinched her little face with the other. It sounds like you have a conscience? Qin Mu stared at him. Zhou Chongguang smiled and turned the car to the Qin family's place. Half an hour later, he dropped her off. When Qin Mu got out of the car, she was still a little dependent. You, get off work early. He leaned over and kissed her little face. His voice was a little hoarse. I'll pick you up tonight. Qin Mu got out of the car, waved at him, and watched the car drive away. Behind her, a little person hugged her body and said in a soft voice, Aunt. Qin Mu immediately knew that it was Xiaoishu. She smiled and turned around with the little fellow in her arms. She really could eat. In just a few days, she had gained a little weight. Qin Mu really liked her and kissed her. What delicious food did you eat? She took a whiff of the milky fragrance and was as intoxicated as Yi Muyun. Xiaoishu hugged her with her chubby hands and pointed at Yi Liangqiu. Grandma, Grandma, Qin Mu corrected her with a smile, it's Grandma. Xiaoishu reached out to hold her face and gave her a sweet kiss. Yi Liangqiu walked over and hugged Xiaoishu. Then, she smiled at her little daughter. She likes you very much. Yi Liangqiu looked at Xiaoishu and was overjoyed. On one hand, Xiaoishu was really cute, and on the other hand, she looked like Cher when they were young. Yi Liangqiu treated Xiaoishu well, as if she could make it up to Cher. She knew that after so long, Muyun and Cher were married. Cher did not care, but what happened 8 years ago had always been a knot in Yi Liangqiu's heart. So, she spoiled her granddaughter a little too much. At least, Qin Mu had never seen the siblings being so spoiled. She was afraid that it would melt if she kept it in her mouth. She smiled and held Xiaoishu's little hand. It's probably because of our blood relationship. Xiaoishu was here. Actually, her brother and Cher could not go anywhere. Ishu's body was here. If they touched something, would they have to draw Lan Yu's blood again? The newlyweds just found a resort in B City to enjoy the world of just the two of them. Chapter 2464. Yi Liangqiu held the little baby, and her eyes were always on the little baby's little face. It was really the same as Cher when she was a child. The more she looked at it, the cuter she looked. Yi Liangqiu was such a cold person in the past, but now she was like an ordinary grandmother, kissing her granddaughter again and again. Xiaoishu was so embarrassed that she buried her little face in Yi Liangqiu's arms. Qin Mu also knew that her mother had taken the little girl to relatives these days and showed her around several times. She was satisfied physically and mentally. Her father had called to complain that he no longer had a sex life. At that time, Qin Mu almost spat out a mouthful of water when she heard it. So she wanted to come and have a look. At first glance, she found that her mother's enthusiasm was like those cat owners who were addicted to cats. She couldn't help but say, Mom, let's let go of the past. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Yi Liangqiu held Xiaoishu and looked at Qin Mu. She sighed slightly, I know, but I always feel sorry for Cher. You don't have to say anything about your brother, but Cher is really unfair to her. You have felt guilty for so many years. Qin Mu stepped forward and hugged her mother's arm from the side. Mom, if you want to blame someone, blame me. I am not sensible. Yi Liangqiu turned her head and looked at her. She didn't know whether she was glad or not. After all, Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang got along well now. Zhou Chongguang was very concerned about Qin Mu, and there were no flowers and plants outside. Qin Mu looked at her mother and smiled. In such a happy smile, Yi Liangqiu was also redeemed. The mother and daughter were playing Little Yi Shu, what? While chatting, Yi Liangqiu was most concerned about the relationship between Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang's mother. After all, the Zhou family and the Qin family still had some conflicts in the past. Qin Mu nodded, it's okay. It's just. She bit her lower lip. His mother seems to be very anxious to have a grandson. Then, Qin Mu told her mother the truth. Mom, didn't Qin Chen tell you? Of course, Qin Chen would not hide this kind of thing from her mother. Yi Liangqiu hesitated for a moment and nodded, I heard it from him. Qin Mu's expression was a little stunned. After a long time, she said, Mom, Zhou Chongguang said that if he can't get pregnant, he will adopt a child. I'm afraid that his mother will be unhappy. Yi Liangqiu reached out and stroked her long hair. The key to this matter is Zhou Chongguang's attitude. He must have thought it through. Besides, you and his mother will not be together. You just look at him coldly occasionally, and then you can act coquettishly to Zhou Chongguang. The most important thing for a husband and wife is the relationship between a husband and wife. Of course, the premise is that you still want to live a good life with him. Qin Mu nodded and smiled. Her mood was obviously better. She stayed in the Qin family for a day and talked with her mother about the art gallery. When Yi Liangqiu heard that she was going to run it with Cher, she laughed. Then you plan to be the shopkeeper alone. Mom. Qin Mu said discontentedly, you can't say that in front of Cher. Yi Liangqiu pinched Xiao Yishu's face and said directly, it's not Cher's problem. It's your brother's problem. Don't be fooled by your brother's high position and power. In fact, he hasn't been weaned yet. Yi Liangqiu criticized her son without any pressure. Qin Mu laughed, Mom, my brother will be furious if he hears it. Chapter 2465. Yi Liangqiu was still smiling. Look at him. He can't wait to keep his wife by his side 24 hours a day. Isn't this a waste of time for Cher? Although Qin Mu laughed, she still said something fair. Cher doesn't seem to have any ambitions. Her mother asked with a smile, then why did you ask her to cooperate with you? Well, it was still Jiang Lao who was shrewd. Her mother saw through her in an instant. Qin Mu finally confessed, my brother has a lot of connections. In the future, I will ask Cher to draw a few paintings with a high standard. In order to flatter his wife, my brother will have to spend a lot of money. Yi Liangqiu was annoyed and amused at the same time. You're thinking about your own family. I've never seen you with such a mind before. I have a lot of tricks and schemes. Qin Mu blinked. Seeing her like this, Yi Liangqiu was also satisfied. The two of them chatted and laughed, and the day passed. However, Zhou Chongguang called and said that he would pick her up later. Qin Mu said that it was not necessary, and she went back in the driver's car. When she got home, it was already 8 o'clock. Looking at the parking lot, Zhou Chongguang's car had not come back yet. She took a shower and lay in bed for a long time, reading a book, but he had not come back yet. At 10 o'clock, Qin Mu couldn't help but call, Zhou Chongguang, when are you coming back? Her voice was lingering, with a girl's tenderness. Zhou Chongguang's voice was gentle. I'll be back soon. Be good and go to sleep first. To be honest, Qin Mu was still a little disappointed. She thought that after making up with him, he would be less socialized and at least come home at 8 or 9 o'clock. She didn't know what time it was the first day. However, she had a small temper, and it was not appropriate for her to vent her grievances to him, so she kept silent. On the other side, his voice was low and husky. You want me to come back early, right? Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. All right, I'll try my best to come back as soon as possible. His voice was even gentler, revealing an inexplicable exhaustion. Qin Mu was a little disappointed. It'll take a long time. Soon, be good and sleep early. He coaxed her, not showing the slightest bit of impatience. Qin Mu suddenly became willful. Then take a video and send it to me now. I want to see what the fourth bureau looks like. The man on the other side stopped breathing. After a while, he asked softly, Mumu, you don't believe me? I just want to see it, she said somewhat unreasonably. At first, she thought that he would be angry, but he didn't. Not only was he not angry, he even took a picture online for her to see. He was indeed in his own office. There was no one around. He was the only one sitting in front of his desk. However, the sofa was still there. Qin Mu's heart was stifled when he saw this, so he quickly hung up. After lying down, she couldn't fall asleep for a while. She tossed and turned, and then she fell asleep in a daze. When Zhou Chongguang came back, it was already 1 o'clock in the night. When he walked into the master bedroom gently, Qin Mu was already asleep. He took off his coat, slowly walked to the bed, sat down, and reached out to caress her little face. She didn't sleep well, and he didn't know if she had cried before she went to bed. A doted little wife would always be a little sentimental, let alone his Mumu. He reached out to touch her little face and whispered, Mumu, I won't hurt you. At this time, she woke up and looked at him with tears in her eyes. Are you back? I'm back. Chapter 2466. Zhou Chongguang still stroked her little face and lowered his head to kiss her. I'll take a shower first. However, Qin Mu did not let him leave. She put her little arms around his neck and said softly, I want to hold you for a while. You became so small all of a sudden? He chuckled in a low voice, but he still satisfied her little wish. He gently hugged her and coaxed her as if he were coaxing a baby. Qin Mu's little face rested on his shoulder. Her expression was a little misty. She hugged him for a long time and did not let go. Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little hoarse. What's wrong with Mumu? Are you angry? He lowered his head to find her lips and kissed her lightly. I won't be so late in the future. Qin Mu did not say anything. She just folded her little face between his chin and neck. Her soft appearance made him unable to bear it any longer. He held her little face and kissed her deeply. However, he still cared about her mood and asked, Mumu, I want you. She did not say anything, but hugged him tighter. Zhou Chongguang followed her direction, pressed her down, and kissed her intensely. As they kissed, his tone changed. He had never been so fierce and rough. At first, Qin was still engrossed, but later, she could not stand it anymore. She raised her head slightly and whispered in his ear, "Zhou Chongguang, be gentle." Only then did he understand. Then he pressed his face against hers and let out a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mumu. I lost control." Later, he became gentle, but he was a little absent-minded. Fortunately, Qin was too tired and fell asleep. After a while, the thin sweat had already turned cold, but Zhou Chongguang's body was filled with endless emptiness. He did not take a shower immediately. Instead, he held her in such a posture and felt her existence. His eyes, has been staring at her, did not blink, for fear that she will disappear. It was not until his eyes were sore that he closed them and murmured her name, Mumu. He carried her to take a shower. Qin had been asleep the entire time and wasn't very cooperative, but he still insisted on washing her. When they returned to the bedroom, she was asleep, so he carried her and did it twice more. He wanted to give her a child. A child was too important to him. A child should be able to let her stay by his side safely. No matter what happened, she just needed to stay behind him safely. Child? Zhou Chongguang buried his face in her neck. He had never longed for a child so much. Early in the morning, when Qin woke up, Zhou Chongguang was still there. His enlarged handsome face was right in front of her. Qin blinked and said softly, "When did you come back?" "About 1 o'clock. Like her, he rested his head on the pillow. "We made love. Don't you remember?" Hearing his words, Qin blushed. She looked at him and said, "Don't provoke me if you come back late in the future. I provoked you 3 times. He leaned over and gently rubbed her with the tip of his cold nose. It was very intimate. Qin eyes widened slightly. "You're shameless." She vaguely remembered that it was only once. "Then I did it myself." She took a step back, and he pressed forward. He had to tease her. "Looking at your little face makes me interested." Qin bit her lips. She couldn't keep up with his pace. Zhou Chongguang smiled and didn't make things difficult for her anymore. Instead, he reached out and pinched her little face. Then he chuckled. "I'll make medicine for you." Chapter 2467. She remembered that he didn't take any protection last night. She was a little worried. Zhou Chongguang patted her little hand. "You still don't trust Qin Chen?" "Qin Chen is a girl," Qin said discontentedly. Zhou Chongguang laughed and rubbed her hair. "But he doesn't think of himself as a woman. He's more handsome than most men." Qin sat on the bed, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She scratched her hair. "I'll sleep a little longer. I'll ignore you next time you're late. Got it?" His voice was unbelievably gentle. He changed his clothes and went downstairs. Qin was too tired and fell asleep again. When she woke up, she was already in his arms. He fed her the plums, and then the medicine, all with the utmost tenderness. After drinking the medicine, she obediently lay in his arms and even showed some concern for President Zhou. "Do you want to take a break this morning?" Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and smiled. "No need." Qin glanced at him. Her gaze was a little meaningful. "I'm only 28, Mrs. Zhou." He pinched her little face. "I still have this little energy." Qin covered her head with the quilt and refused to speak again. And Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little stunned. Just like that, the days passed. Qin was also a little busy. The gallery had begun to be renovated. Just like her mother thought, she couldn't count on Cher. Her brother was very strict. Xiao Yishu was directly left to her grandmother, and her brother took his new wife to work every day. And her brother didn't feel ashamed. Instead, he felt very happy. Qin sometimes hugged Zhou Chongguang and said that if she didn't do the gallery, she would also go to work with him every day. The next day, Zhou Chongguang really wanted to dig her out. Qin smiled and hugged the quilt, saying that she didn't want to. She didn't want to go out early and come back late. It was so tiring. "So you lied to me. You little liar." Zhou Chongguang carried her in his arms and looked at his watch. "There's still half an hour left." Qin pretended to scream, "What do you want to do?" "Let's make love." He spat out these 2 words very seductively. Then, he pulled off the quilt and threw himself at her, his blood boiling. Qin struggled with all her might. Her pajamas slid open, revealing her soft and fragrant body. He hadn't touched her for a few days, so half an hour might not be enough. He would probably be late. Just as he was about to lose control of himself, Zhou Chongguang's phone rang. 1 sound, 2 sounds. He was still pressing down on Qin, unwilling to stop, unable to. How could a man stop at such a time? If he did, he wouldn't be a man. Qin was a little dazed at first, but she was also ruined by the ringtone. After a while, she came back to her senses and reached out to grab his phone. Zhou Chongguang pressed her with one hand and took the phone with the other. He saw that it was Zhao Zi, so he picked it up. "I'll go to the company in an hour." As he said that, he threw the phone on the ground far away. Qin Mu's voice was intermittent. "You won't have subordinates if you do this. I only need you," he whispered in her ear as he was feeling warm. Qin Mu couldn't do anything to him, and he spent a lot of time igniting her body again. After that, Qin Mu had no strength to lie down, but Zhou Chongguang still boiled medicine for her and made breakfast for her before going to the company. Chapter 2468. At first, Qin Mu was a little dissatisfied, but after a long time, she got used to it. She went to bed early and read for a while before going to bed. Later, she slowly added some books on childcare to the bedside. That night, Zhou Chongguang looked at the book and stared at it for a long time. Then, he hugged her. He didn't do anything. He just hugged her and told her that they would definitely have children. Qin Mu pursed her lips and felt that he was a little strange. She poked him with her little hand and said, "Zhou Chongguang." He nodded calmly. "You seem to like children even more than I do," she whispered. He nodded again and said, "I like children that you give birth to." He wanted her to give birth to a little Qin Mu. From an early age, he wanted to dote on this child and make up for what he owed Qin Mu. He wanted to live a good life with her. The absurdities of the past would not happen again. Because he loved her so much now, and he would always love her in the future. Qin Mu nodded and said in a low voice, "What if I can't give birth? Then I'll like you." He kissed her forehead and said in a particularly hoarse voice, "Mu, we agreed that it won't change, okay?" She felt a little more at ease and talked to him about her gallery. Although Zhou Chongguang was busy, he still listened to his wife's words carefully. She looked so happy that he could tell that Qin Mu was really happy now. Zhou Chongguang thought that it was fine as long as she was happy. When he went to work, Qin Mu couldn't help but be childish again. In order to keep him, she even took the initiative to make him stay. Zhou Chongguang's soul was gone. He had a good time with her before leaving. Qin Mu slept at home alone until noon. After eating, she drove to see the progress of the gallery in the afternoon. The designer was introduced by Zhou Chongguang. After looking at the drawings, Qin Mu was also very satisfied. She didn't need to worry about anything. After she was done, she went to the shopping center to buy some supplements. She wanted to visit Cher on the way, as she hadn't seen her for half a month. She wanted to take a look at her treasured paintings. Qin Mu put the things in the trunk and was about to open the door when she felt a pain in her lower abdomen. She was in so much pain that she bent over and felt like she was on fire. At this moment, she didn't even have the strength to open the car door, let alone drive. His fingers trembled as he picked up his phone and dialed Zhou Chongguang's number. But his cell phone was switched off. Then, she called his secretary. The secretary answered the phone and said that Zhou Zong was in a meeting and would ask Zhou Zong to call Mrs. Zhou back. Qin Mu's fingers clung to the car door and her forehead was covered with cold sweat. "Call Zhou Chongguang to come to the phone." The secretary was so scared that she wet her pants. After a long time, she told the truth. "Zhou Zong is not in the company." "So, did Zhou Chongguang ask you to say that?" Qin Mu sneered and smashed the phone. Switched off his phone and lied to her that he was in the company. Where was he? Why was he so busy these days? Qin Mu couldn't help but think about it. At this moment, she realized how difficult it was to maintain a so-called perfect marriage with a man with a criminal record. She had trusted him completely before. When he came back so late, she never thought about anything else. But this phone call, Qin Mu knew that there was definitely something wrong. If there was nothing wrong, he wouldn't switch off his phone, and he wouldn't let the secretary say that he was in a meeting. Qin Mu's stomach was very painful, but she still forced herself to take a taxi. To Glory. Chapter 2469. The chauffeur drove for 2 minutes and they arrived at Glory. Glory was very different from before. Zhou Chongguang had used 8 years to turn a traditional family business into a tech upstart in B City. The 2 Gemini towers were both 68 stories tall and shone with a cold and noble glow under the sunlight. Qin Mu stood at the bottom of the tower, feeling dizzy. The receptionist recognized her, mainly because Qin Mu had caused a ruckus the last time. Moreover, she had recently heard that Zhou Zong and Madame's relationship was very good, so a divorce was impossible. Thus, she did not dare to be negligent this time and immediately went forward with a smile. "Madam, are you looking for Zhou Zong?" Just as she finished speaking, she was shocked because Qin Mu's expression was too ugly. Qin Mu pushed the receptionist away. "I'll go up myself." The receptionist was shocked. She wanted to help her up but did not dare, so she immediately made a phone call to inform the secretary on the top floor. The phone was smashed by Qin Mu. After smashing it, Qin Mu said coldly, "If you dare to move again, I'll try it." As she did all this, she felt an indescribable pain in her lower abdomen. She did not know how she persevered, but she walked into the elevator like a shrew and rushed to the top floor. Qin Mu's heart was in a mess. She even thought about what she would do if she went up at that moment and found out that there was a woman in Zhou Chongguang's office. Would she turn around and leave, or would she scratch his face on the spot? She thought that she might do that. However, when she pushed open the door to the office, it was empty inside. Not to mention the scent of a woman, there was not even the scent of a person. Right in front of her was a set of sofas. It was no longer the original set. These days, he had changed everything in the office. He had done what he said. But why did he lie to her? Qin Mu stood there in a daze. Behind her stood Zhou Chongguang's little secretary, who said carefully, "Zhou Zong is not in the office. He might have something urgent." She paused for a moment. "Vice President Zhao is here." Qin Mu suddenly turned around and looked at Zhao Zi, Zhou Chongguang's good friend. Zhao Zi's expression was also not very good. His eyes were locked on Qin Mu's face as he called out to her, "Qin Mu, are you not feeling well?" Qin Mu took a step back to avoid his kindness. Her voice was even colder. "Where is Zhou Chongguang?" "I went out to discuss business," Zhao Zi replied without thinking. His expression was natural. Qin Mu was unmoved. Why did his secretary say he was in a meeting? That's for dealing with other women. The little secretary is used to it and hasn't come back to her senses yet. After all, Chongguang wouldn't take the initiative to mention his private life to a secretary, Zhao Zi replied flawlessly. Qin Mu was speechless. The little secretary nodded furiously. "Yes, that's right. That's right." At this moment, Zhao Zi went up to support Qin Mu. "I'll send you to the hospital. Qin Mu, don't be willful. Chongguang will be worried." Qin Mu reached out to push him away. But she was too weak and couldn't push him away. She turned and looked at Zhao Zi. "Where is he?" Her woman's intuition told her that Zhao Zi was helping Zhou Chongguang hide something. Zhao Zi smiled. "He's discussing a collaboration. It's not convenient for women to go. Qin Mu, Chongguang would at most hug you at such a place. He definitely won't do anything else." When he said that, Qin Mu naturally had nothing to say. Besides, she was in so much pain that she couldn't even stand. Chapter 2470. Zhao Zi nodded and carried Qin Mu in his arms. Qin Mu struggled for a while before losing her strength. Her face was pale. The elevator soon arrived at the lobby on the first floor. The secretary held the door for them but didn't follow them. There were many people in the lobby. They watched President Zhao carry Zhou Zong's wife out of the elevator. They were all silent. New gossip quietly spread within Glory Group. Everyone was guessing whether Mrs. Zhou came today for Zhou Zong or President Zhao. Zhao Zi sat in the car and turned to look at Qin Mu, who was lying in the back seat. He whispered, "Hold on a little longer. I'll go to the nearest hospital." As he spoke, he started the car. The rearview mirror reflected his tense handsome face, and his fingers that were gripping the steering wheel were pale. He had told Zhou Chongguang before that Qin Mu was the one he liked. Although this was a little provocative to Zhou Chongguang, it was also the truth. Seeing Qin Mu like this, he felt sorry for her. When waiting at the red light, Zhao Zi called Zhou Chongguang, but his phone was still turned off. He cursed, hung up the phone, and focused on driving. 10 minutes later, they arrived at City's First People's Hospital's emergency room. Qin Mu was in so much pain that she couldn't walk. He could only carry her. Anyone who saw them would think that they were husband and wife. "Hold on a little longer." Zhao Zi quickly walked over. His voice was a little low. "I used my connections. I can see it immediately." Qin Mu nodded. At this moment, she was still grateful to Zhao Zi because she couldn't stand it anymore. Zhao Zi took the elevator directly to the emergency room on the 4th floor. After getting off the elevator, he quickly walked to the consultation room. Unexpectedly, his footsteps gradually slowed down, and he even turned around to leave. But Qin Mu had already seen it. She saw Zhou Chongguang. She saw Gu Mei, who was 4 or 5 months pregnant. Of course, there was also Mrs. Zhou. They were like a warm family. She stared at Zhou Chongguang, and Zhou Chongguang stared back at her. The surroundings suddenly quietened down. Only he, her, Gu Mei, and Gu Mei's stomach were left. She stared for a long time until her eyes were sore. Then, she blinked her teary eyes and asked Zhao Zi softly, "You said that he was discussing a contract with someone and that there might be a young lady sitting beside him. It wouldn't be convenient for me to go. But Zhao Zi, why didn't you tell me that he and Gu Mei had a child?" 4 or 5 months. That was when they wanted to divorce. Was it before or after? Qin Mu tried hard to blink away the tears in her eyes, but the more she blinked, the more she couldn't control. She buried her face in Zhao Zi's shoulder and whispered, "Take me away." However, Zhao Zi could not make the decision on this matter. He liked her, but she was now Chong Guang's wife, and Chong Guang had no love for Gu Mei. Chong Guang was just temporarily passive. He didn't move. Qin Mu's hand hammered on his shoulder and slapped him. "I'm telling you to leave." It was the first time that a proud person like her had lost her composure in public. It was the first time that she did not care about her pride. It was because the blow was too great. Everything in front of her was beyond what she could bear. And that slap on Zhao Zi's face was more like a slap on Zhou Chongguang's face. Zhou Chongguang walked over quickly and said in a low voice, "Mumu, what's wrong?" However, Qin Mu had already fainted. Perhaps she was avoiding him, or perhaps she did not want to see him. Her hand fell limply and she buried her face in Zhao Zi's shoulder. It was as if everything had nothing to do with Zhou Chongguang. Chapter 2471. There was no trace of blood on Zhou Chongguang's face. Naturally, Qin Mu couldn't answer him. Zhao Zi said in a low voice, "Her stomach hurts. It might be gastroenteritis, or worse, she's not pregnant." Zhou Chongguang interrupted Zhao Zi's conjecture and directly carried Qin Mu from his arms. He carried her carefully, as if he was carrying a treasure. Then, he walked straight to the emergency room. Behind him, Gu Mei's face was pale. Her hand was on her stomach, and she didn't move at all. Meanwhile, Mama Zhou called out to Zhou Chongguang. "Chongguang, think about it carefully." Compared to Qin Mu, Mama Zhou actually liked Gu Mei more. Gu Mei went to jail for Zhou Chongguang when she was 20 years old. Moreover, Qin Mu's brother indirectly caused old Zhou's death, and Gu Mei had a child. Mama Zhou's heart was clear about this. In her heart, Gu Mei was more suitable for Chongguang now. Not to mention anything else, with Qin Mu's temper, she wouldn't be able to tolerate Gu Mei's child. And Mama Zhou wasn't willing to give up on this child. If Qin Mu didn't have any physiological problems, Mama Zhou wouldn't care too much about this child. However, it was obvious that Qin Mu couldn't give birth to the child. As a traditional old lady, Mama Zhou's little schemes became somewhat reasonable. Even though Mama Zhou said this, Zhou Chongguang didn't even stop. He only hugged Qin Mu and pressed his face against Qin Mu's face. His expression was so gentle, a kind of tenderness that was very painful. Gu Mei was dressed in red. She stood and said softly, "Auntie, don't make things difficult for him." She lowered her head and caressed her stomach. "I just want to give birth to the child. It's fine as long as you bring him up. Nothing else matters." At this moment, Zhao Zi walked over slowly and looked at Gu Mei coldly. "If you really think this way, why did you come back? You could have given birth to this child in France. You could have just said that you gave birth to it with someone else." A few years later, Chongguang and Qin Mu's child might already be a few years old. You and the child's appearance wouldn't change anything. For the sake of the child, Qin Mu wouldn't divorce, but you chose to come back at this time. Gu Mei, do you think anyone would believe that you didn't think of anything? Gu Mei's face was pale. She looked at Zhou Chongguang and said after a long time, "You found me." "Yes, we found you. If I can't find you, you'll find Qin Mu." Zhao Zi sneered, "Gu Mei, I have really underestimated you. Chongguang wanted to abort the child in your womb and you went to look for his mother. Gu Mei, what are you trying to do? Force her to abdicate? You want to take the seat that Mrs. Zhou had last week?" Gu Mei shook her head. "I didn't. Really?" Zhao Zi said word by word, "I don't believe a single word you said. If you abort the child now, I'll believe you." Gu Mei's face turned even worse. She took a step back and covered her stomach with her hand. "Zi, why don't you believe me? You know it in your heart." Zhao Zi looked at Mama Zhou. He was very close to Mama Zhou and treated her like another son. He said slowly, "Mama Zhou, Chongguang loves Qin Mu very much. If you want to divorce Chongguang because of this child, you'll destroy him." "Really?" A few days ago, he saw with his own eyes how good Zhou Chongguang's mood was. He couldn't wait to go home every day. Sometimes, he would even order a bouquet of flowers for work. Chapter 2472. This was Chongguang's first relationship with a wife who was about to get divorced. They had reconciled, and such a perfect marriage couldn't be ruined because of Gu Mei's willfulness when she left. Zhao Zi couldn't agree to that. Mama Zhou's expression was ugly as she said slowly, "I never forced Chongguang to get a divorce. But when he found out that Gu Mei was pregnant, he tried to find someone to force her to abort the child." "Have you ever thought about why Chongguang would do that?" Zhao Zi's voice was stern. "It's because he knows your attitude, and he can't give up on Qin Mu." He paused and looked at Gu Mei. "You said you love him, but you used the child to scheme against him, to possess him in the name of love? Qin Mu loved him in the past, but Qin Mu learned to let go. She gave up on Chongguang, but Chongguang loved her and refused to divorce her. That's how they got to where they are today. Think about it, will you be happy with Chongguang? If he loved you, he would have loved you long ago. He wouldn't have waited until today. Zhao Zi heaved a sigh. He had probably had enough. Ever since Gu Mei appeared, he and Zhou Chongguang felt like they were living in hell every day. Chongguang found Gu Mei and offered a high price. He was even willing to give Gu Mei 20% of Rongguang's shares. Chongguang's thinking was simple. As long as the child was gone, Qin Mu wouldn't leave him. That day, he even asked himself if Qin Mu would still follow him if he became a pauper. That day, Zhou Chongguang got drunk and said that he didn't dare to go back. He said that when he fed Qin Mu the medicine, he felt guilty. After making love with her, he felt sorry for her, as though he had done it for the sake of the child. That night, Zhou Chongguang cried. Zhao Zi then realized how deep his love was. So when the child appeared, Chongguang didn't even think about it and decided not to keep the child. After Zhou Chongguang said that, Gu Mei's expression was terrible. Her lips trembled and she couldn't say a word. Zhao Zi turned around and left. As he walked, he said, "Think about it carefully." Gu Mei was still standing there, biting her lips so hard that it was about to bleed. Zhou Kerson's mother went up to support her. Mother Zhou looked at Gu Mei's expression and whispered after a long time, "This child is almost 5 months old." It was a baby, and Mother Zhou had secretly asked someone to find out that it was a baby boy. To the Zhou family, boys were the heirs of the family. If Qin Mu couldn't give birth, then this child might be Chongguang's only flesh and blood. How could Mother Zhou bear it? She looked at Gu Mei and said carefully, "Gu Mei, if you don't want this child, then I'll raise it, okay?" Gu Mei turned her head and looked at Mother Zhou. She forced a smile and said, "I will not give up on this child." Mother Zhou was in a dilemma. What Zhao Zi said just now was still useful to her. Between her grandson and her son, she still had to weigh the pros and cons. Gu Mei looked at Mother Zhou and said in a low voice, "I just want to stay at Auntie's place. Otherwise, Chongguang will definitely think of a way to abort this child." Thinking of the tragic state of her grandson being aborted, Mother Zhou's heart trembled. How could she bear it? Her voice trembled slightly. How can this be? The child must be born. Chapter 2473. Gu Mei lowered her head and murmured, She stroked her belly with her fingers, and her mood was a little complicated. She loved Zhou Chongguang for so many years. Since he drove her away, she had told herself that this was her last chance. If she had a child, she would come back to him. If she didn't have a child, then she would give up. She had a child, but Qin Mu seemed to be unable to conceive. Wasn't this arranged by God? Gu Mei didn't want to give up such an opportunity. After seeing how well Zhou Chongguang treated Qin Mu, she knew that he also had a heart. She wanted him to treat her like that, and she wanted to be his real wife. She had wanted it for a long, long time. She was the one who met Zhou Chongguang first. Now that she was pregnant with his child, why should she let him have it? She didn't want to give up. She wanted to have him. Their family of 3 would be very good and happy. Zhao Zi rushed to the emergency room. Qin Mu had already been examined. It was acute gastritis. The reason was that Qin Mu took medicine every day and then didn't eat anything. After a few months, even an iron stomach couldn't stand it. When Zhao Zi went over, Qin Mu hadn't woken up yet. Zhou Chongguang asked for a ward and carried her to a single ward. Zhao Zi followed him and said in a low voice, "Chongguang, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were here." There was no expression on Zhou Chongguang's face. He said slowly, "I took Gu Mei to the hospital. She said that she agreed to have an abortion, but she called my mother. My mother just came, and you and Mumu arrived." He paused for a moment and said, "I don't blame you. You didn't do it on purpose." It was possible that this was the fate of him and Mumu, or it could be said that he had done it himself. That night, he could have not gone to see Gu Mei, or he could have said that Gu Mei had drugged him, but he didn't drink it. He knew that it was drugged, but it was because he didn't care about Qin Mu at that time. He just felt that it was nothing to have sex with another woman, which led to today. Zhou Chongguang closed his eyes slightly. "If I can keep Qin Mu, I'm willing to pay any price." Zhao Zi turned his head. "Including your mother?" Zhou Chongguang stopped, but he didn't say anything and walked straight into the ward. The young nurse was busy at the side, hooking up the drip. When she was done, the young nurse left. Just as Zhao Zi was about to speak, Zhou Chongguang softly said, "Zi, you go back first. I want to be alone with her." When she woke up, she would definitely be angry and even do some ugly things. She didn't want others to see this. Because she was Qin Mu, the Qin Mu who was rather arrogant in her bones. The things that she liked were all very elegant. She had never seen anything that was not clean. If there was, it was him, Zhou Chongguang. He, and, Mu, Qin, Mu, Qin, Shen, N. Shen, Chongguang, Mu, 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 I, was. The couple were left alone. Zhou Chongguang reached out and gently stroked Qin Mu's little face. Her face was very cold, and even in her sleep, she was frowning. Does it hurt? Zhou Chongguang's voice was low. Mumu, tell me if it hurts. His voice was almost trembling. Does it hurt physically or mentally? Chapter 2474. Only now did he realize what it was like to love someone and what it felt like. If she was in a little pain, he would feel 100 times more pain. Zhou Chongguang knew that the price he had to pay for loving Qin Mu was to be cruel to that child. He had never hesitated, at least not until now. He had no feelings for that child, and he even felt that it was not his child, because there was no love and no participation. He felt that the child had nothing to do with him. However, Qin Mu would care. Zhou Chongguang had been guarding her, waiting for her to wake up. At this time, he had no time to care about his mother and Gu Mei. His heart was filled with Qin Mu. He was thinking about Qin Mu's first reaction when she woke up and saw him. He was afraid and looking forward to it. When Qin Mu woke up, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The winter sun shone into the ward through the glass, making Qin Mu's face pale. Qin Mu slowly opened her eyes, and her long eyelashes blinked gently. She felt a little sad. What she saw was Zhou Chongguang's face. It seemed that she hadn't seen him for a long time, and he had become much more haggard. Qin Mu was a little absent-minded. She just looked at him. She hadn't come back to her senses, but tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes. Zhou Chongguang, let's leave, but before she could finish her words, her lips were blocked by him. Zhou Chongguang blocked her lips, his dark eyes locked on her little face, and his voice was low and hoarse. Mumu, don't ever say these 2 words out loud, okay? I'll give you time. He lowered his eyes and said these 2 words very softly. I'm sorry. Qin Mu's tears flowed even more. Drop by drop, they flowed down and stained the pillow. Zhou Chongguang felt that his heart was about to break, and he kept comforting her. Mumu. She didn't say anything, turned her face to the side, and turned her back to him. After a long time, she said softly, Zhou Chongguang, I'm tired. Then you sleep, and I'll watch you, he said, almost cautiously. At this moment, he somewhat understood how she felt at that time. This was probably how she felt when she loved humbly. Qin Mu turned her back. Her tears did not stop. He knew that she had been crying, but he did not dare to disturb her. He was afraid she would say that word again. He couldn't bear to lose her. However, things had to be resolved eventually. No matter how difficult or painful it was, he had to experience it at least once. Half an hour later, he said in a hoarse voice, Qin Mu, this child will not be born. Qin Mu didn't say anything. He didn't say anything else. He just lay down beside her and hugged her from behind. Qin Mu struggled a little, but he hugged her tightly and refused to let go. In the end, she was too weak to struggle against him, but her body was stiff and she resisted. His voice was deep in her ears. Mumu, trust me once. This child was born before. After we got together, I didn't do anything with her or any other woman. She believed his words. Because he did not have any contact with any woman after that. She could feel it. But she couldn't accept a child. Especially when she tried hard to have a child with him, but another woman had a child. This was a very shameful thing for Qin Mu. What's more, he and his mother were accompanying Gu Mei to the hospital for a prenatal checkup. Qin Mu suddenly felt that everything was ridiculous. Chapter 2475. She turned her head and didn't want to talk to him. He didn't dare to force her, but he was still uneasy. He didn't dare to leave her for a moment, for fear that she would disappear as soon as he left. He asked in a hoarse voice, Are you hungry? I'll ask someone to bring you food, okay? Qin Mu finally ignored him and said in a tired voice, Zhou Chongguang, call my mother. Her cell phone was broken. Zhou Chongguang was stunned for a moment and immediately understood her intentions. But how could he be willing? Yi Liangqiu would probably come to pick her up. Now that something had happened to them, once she left, she might not come back again. Even if it was painful, he would rather stay in his hands and suffer. Zhou Chongguang's voice was very soft. Mumu, the doctor said that we can go home after the drip. Let's eat something first. I'll cook something delicious for you when we get home, okay? As he spoke, he gently stroked her long hair. Every word, every sentence, and every action of his was filled with humble love. Zhou Chongguang had never loved her before. When he was young, he liked Tang Sher because he was young and arrogant, but now, he didn't dare to be arrogant. He hated not to kneel in front of her and beg for forgiveness, but he knew that Qin Mu didn't want this. He could only beg her silently. If she loved him in her heart, she would understand. Qin Mu's tears fell again. She turned her head and looked at him silently. After looking at it for a long time, she asked softly, Zhou Chongguang, is that still our home? Can we still go back? Zhou Chongguang's heart was trembling. He half knelt on the ground, held her waist devoutly, and buried his face in her arms, as if he could enter her heart and know what she was thinking. Time seemed to have stopped. The sun shone on them, but it couldn't warm her or him. As powerful as Zhou Chongguang was, he also had such a powerless time. He said quietly, Mumu, I will take care of it. Qin Mu turned her head. Zhou Chongguang, how are you going to handle this? Abort that child? Or do you pretend that he doesn't exist? After saying that, she raised her head and said softly, no matter how we deal with it, this child really existed. Her voice suddenly became very, very soft. You already knew, didn't you? That's why you fed me medicine every day and made love to me every day. You thought that I wouldn't leave and divorce you because I was pregnant, right? Zhou Chongguang raised his head slightly and looked at her silently. Qin Mu gently wiped his tears and smiled. However, it was a bitter smile. Zhou Chongguang, you indeed understand me very well. But I'm not pregnant. Her voice was soft. Perhaps this is heaven's will. No. He held her close and buried his face in the side of her neck, and in a moment she felt the heat and wetness. Was that Zhou Chongguang, crying? Zhou Chongguang closed his eyes slightly and whispered in her ear, Mumu, we will still have children. Qin Mu was a little absent-minded. Really? We still have children? Qin Mu's tears fell again. Zhou Chongguang, now when I look at you, I will think of the process of you making Gumei pregnant. Her voice was soft and bitter. I can't do it, Zhou Chongguang. He buried his head in her neck and raised his voice slightly. He was also a little excited. Qin Mu, what do you want? Leave me? Leave, huh? Chapter 2476. Qin Mu didn't say anything. He probably felt that his tone was too forceful, so he softened his voice. We will be fine and have children. However, he might have said all this just to convince himself that she wouldn't leave him. The doctor came over to check Qin Mu again and said with a smile, let's observe her for another night. If there's nothing wrong tonight, she can be discharged tomorrow morning. Zhou Chongguang nodded. After the doctor left, he picked up the dinner that his family had sent over, opened it, and adjusted her bed. Because her stomach wasn't good, she ate very lightly. He spooned some porridge to her mouth and said in a low voice, Mumu, eat something, okay? Qin Mu looked up at him. She didn't torture her stomach because she was angry with him, but she said lightly, I'll eat it myself. He didn't force her and silently handed her the spoon. Qin Mu ate very slowly. Her little face was still a little pale, and she didn't feel good eating, but she forced herself to eat. Because only by eating would she have the strength to leave him. Zhou Chongguang had been silently watching her eat and silently watching her lie down again. She was very quiet, but as if he didn't exist, as if he was air. He would rather she break the bowl, get angry with him, be angry with him, cry with him, and fight with him. But she was so quiet, and his heart was even more flustered. He stood by the bed and quietly watched her calm little face until she fell asleep because of the medicine. At this time, night fell and the lights were turned on. The blazing white light cast on Zhou Chongguang's face, which looked pale and gloomy. He stood quietly for a long time before going out softly. Now he needed to smoke and calm down. When they reached the corridor, Mo Yan's hands were trembling. At the end of the aisle, the light was dim. He stood there alone, and his back was lonely. When Gumei walked over, she saw Zhou Chongguang like this, surrounded by loneliness. She was thinking, was it because Qin Mu ignored him that he was lonely? Is she okay? Gumei asked softly. In that instant, Zhou Chongguang's body tensed up. He slowly turned his head around, his expression extremely sinister. Even when Gumei had accompanied him through the darkness, she had never seen Zhou Chongguang have such an expression. At this moment, he was even angrier than when he was forced to be with Qin Mu. Gumei suppressed her anger and raised a bright smile. Longzi finally fell in love with the clean little princess, didn't he? Zhou Chongguang did not make a sound, but continued to stare at her maliciously. Gumei almost cried out, you said that you didn't divorce because you were used to it. I love her. Zhou Chongguang's voice was firm. Gumei, I won't be with you. There was hurt in Gumei's eyes. She looked up at the man she had loved for nearly 10 years and said softly, but we have a child. So what? Zhou Chongguang's voice was very cold. Gumei, abort this child, and I can give you money. Other than me, you can have anything you want. Because he was Qin Mu's. Without glory, he could earn glory for Qin Mu again. If not, he would work to support her. As long as she was willing to be with him, he could do anything. And his words completely stunned Gumei. Anything, except him. Did he love Qin Mu that much? Chapter 2477. Then I'm sorry, I can't give you anything. His voice was very cold. Gume, I'll give you a week to think about it. Do you want money or raise this child yourself? Of course, he could find someone to abort the child, but Zhou Chongguang couldn't do such a thing. Perhaps he could before Qinmu knew, but now that Qinmu knew, he couldn't. Gumei's face was pale, and she took a step back. And Zhou Chongguang walked past her, towards Qinmu's ward. His arm was grabbed, and he didn't look at Gumei. Let go. Gumei's voice was pleading. Chongguang, I don't want anything, just like before. I won't disturb her, and I won't ask for status. The existence of you and this child has already disturbed her. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes. Gumei, you won't get any benefits if you insist on doing things your own way. She was stunned, and after a long time, she said in a low voice, Does this child mean nothing to you? She took his hand and placed it on her abdomen, saying anxiously, Zhou Chongguang, feel it. This is your child. He can already move, and he's 5 months old. He's formed. I don't love you, and I don't love him. Zhou Chongguang said coldly. Gumei, you're on your own. With that, he gently pulled her hand away and left without looking back. Gumei stood there, her whole body cold. She suddenly covered her face, and tears flowed down from between her fingers. Zhou Chongguang, if I could give up, I wouldn't have come to this today. If I could give up, why would I go to jail for you? I don't want what you said. Gumei slowly let go of her hand, and her thin fingers placed on her abdomen. She suddenly smiled. Zhou Chongguang, if you don't want to give it to me, I can only take it myself. The child she was pregnant with was really timely. And she couldn't be more clear about Qinmu's personality. Gumei left and returned to live with Zhou Chongguang's mother. This matter quickly became a gossip, and there was an uproar in B City. Perhaps this was what Gumei wanted. That night, Yi Muyun came over, called Zhou Chongguang to the corridor, and gave him a few punches. Zhou Chongguang's body was thrown against the wall, and the sound was so loud that it sounded like it was going to break a person. Beside him, Cher covered her mouth, and she didn't dare to make a sound. Go to the ward. Yi Muyun said to his little wife in a deep voice. Then, he grabbed Zhou Chongguang's collar with both hands and gave him another round of punches. Cher wanted to stop him, but when she saw that Zhou Chongguang had no intention of fighting back, she whispered to her husband, Don't kill him. In the dark corridor, Zhou Chongguang's body was about to fall apart. He leaned against the wall, panting. His forehead and the corner of his mouth were covered in blood. In the dark passageway, Zhou Chongguang's body was about to fall apart. He leaned against the wall and gasped for breath. His forehead and the corner of his mouth were covered in blood. Not only did you have an affair in marriage, you even had a child with Gumei. Before Gumei was sent away, you and Qinmu fought, and then you even slept with Gumei? But Yi Muyun still felt that it wasn't enough. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the man in front of him. You're very promising. Not only did you have an affair in marriage, you even had a child with Gumei. Before Gumei was sent away, you and Qinmu fought, and then you even slept with Gumei? He apologized twice today, once to Qinmu, and the other time to Qinmu's brother. He was proud, but he knew that if Yi Muyun wanted to take Qinmu away, he wouldn't have a chance. Chapter 2478. Zhou Chongguang supported himself against the wall and stood up slowly. He looked at Yi Muyun and looked straight into Yi Muyun's eyes. Then, his body slowly knelt down. With his head down, he knelt down. At this moment, he abandoned all his self-esteem and pride for the sake of love. If Zhou Chongguang's world could only have Qinmu, then he didn't want anything else. He only wanted Qinmu. Mr. Yi was obviously shocked. He didn't expect Zhou Chongguang to be like this. Back then, when this brat's father left, he also hardened his bones and wasn't willing to beg him. He even did such a crazy thing, playing a life and death struggle. Even the young and vigorous Yi Muyun couldn't win against his treachery. But now, because of Qinmu, Zhou Chongguang knelt down. The person who knelt in front of him was not Zhou Chongguang, but a desperate man. And little Cher stood not far away, covering her mouth, and her eyes were full of disbelief. Yi Muyun looked at his little wife, whose eyes were full of tears. Obviously, the pregnant woman was soft-hearted and sentimental. Mr. Yi wanted to harden his heart, but he found that he was powerless in the face of Zhou Chongguang. He couldn't beat him, and he couldn't scold him. Because Zhou Chongguang was so humble, he fell into the dust and lowered his attitude. Yi Muyun slowly smoked a cigarette and leaned against the opposite wall. He didn't let him think about it, but just asked in a low voice, What are you going to do? His voice was cold and ruthless. Zhou Chongguang, think carefully. Qinmu may be infertile, and Qinmu's child may be your only child. Think carefully before you go to Qinmu. He paused for a while. Qinmu can't stand the torment anymore. You know her illness. If you can't give her everything, then don't give her anything. I know my sister very well. Although it's hard, she can get through it. Zhou Chongguang was still kneeling, and his voice was hoarse. I will give her everything. Yi Muyun was still leaning in the same place, smoking a cigarette quietly, while Zhou Chongguang was kneeling and smoking. There were nurses coming and going around, looking at them curiously. Zhou Chongguang was, after all, a celebrity. The nurses were shocked to see him kneeling there so shamelessly. Some of them even secretly took a photo. Zhou Chongguang was a celebrity, but he didn't care about anything else. He didn't care about anything except Qinmu now. If it could make her feel better, he was willing to do it. After the time it took to smoke a cigarette, Yi Muyun's voice was very indifferent. He wasn't talking to Zhou Chongguang, but to his little wife who was overflowing with love. Schwerer, come here, it's time to go home. Cher moved over and looked up, saying slowly, I want to wait for Qinmu to wake up. Yi Muyun sighed and rubbed her hair. At this time, she won't want to see anyone. She is a little girl who cares about her face. Still, he knew his younger sister very well. Oh, little Cher replied, completely returning to the silly and adorable childhood, and left with Yi Muyun obediently. Zhou Chongguang was still kneeling on the ground. As soon as the elevator closed, he immediately covered his lower abdomen and fell to the ground. In the elevator, Cher looked at her brother and said in a small voice, Will Zhou Chongguang die? He won't die, but he will vomit to death. Mr. Yi said leisurely, he will vomit to death. How he fell in love with a fool like you in the past. Cher almost jumped up. How am I stupid? I'm much smarter now. Mr. Yi nodded in agreement. That's because the child in your belly has integrated your IQ. Cher was speechless. Chapter 2479. In the corridor in front of the ward, Zhou Chongguang was lying on the ground and groaning in pain. He almost suspected that he had suffered internal injuries. Mr. Ye's wife is pregnant. How strong is a man who can't satisfy her? Zhou Chongguang lay there for a long time before he felt a little better. He propped himself up bit by bit and walked into the ward slowly. Under the dim yellow light, Qinmu was sleeping soundly. Just by looking at her like this, he felt that it wasn't that painful anymore. He propped himself up and leaned against the bed, watching over her and their shaky marriage. Under the light, his face was as pale as a piece of paper. He should go to the doctor, but he was not in the mood. He wondered if Qinmu would cry if he collapsed tomorrow. Would she shed tears for him? However, he couldn't collapse because he was afraid that she would cry. He had said that he would protect her well. Zhou Chongguang covered his face, smiled bitterly and helplessly, and sat like this for the whole night. That night, the photo of him kneeling down was known by everyone. Everyone knew that he had an affair and had an illegitimate child. The entrance of Qin Garden was surrounded by reporters. His mother had called him countless times, asking him to go home to deal with it. But Zhou Chongguang only said that he had to accompany Qinmu. This made Mrs. Zhou unhappy. Aren't you worried about Gumei? She is very emotional now. Zhou Chongguang was disheartened. Mom, are you worried about your son? Mrs. Zhou was stunned. Zhou Chongguang had hung up the phone. He couldn't deal with anything else. He just wanted to be with Qinmu. He didn't even care about his reputation or status. He didn't even care about his glory. If the stock price fell, then so be it. If it fell, then he could shamelessly cling to her. Zhou Chongguang hung up the phone and returned to the bed to watch over Qinmu. He looked at her calm little face and reached out to caress her face reluctantly. It had only been a day, but why did he feel that she had lost weight? His body sank a little as he hugged her. He smiled bleakly. At this moment, he did not even dare to hug her. This night was so long for Zhou Chongguang. He kept looking out the window, but he couldn't see a single ray of light. His eyes were already sore from watching, but there was still no sign of him. Perhaps, just like this, he didn't want to wait anymore. He wanted to be with her forever. At this moment, everything stopped. He slowly moved his face closer to hers and closed his eyes. At dawn, Qinmu was in his arms. His embrace was not warm. Instead, it was somewhat cold. She didn't open her eyes. Instead, she took a deep breath and smelled the scent of tobacco and blood on his body. She was stunned for a moment, but still slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Zhou Chongguang's injured face. Qinmu blinked. She felt sour and bitter. After a long while, she came back to her senses. Let go. There was no emotion in her voice, nor was there any warmth. Zhou Chongguang's eyes narrowed. There was a trace of hurt in his eyes. He didn't let go. Instead, he asked in a hoarse voice, "Aren't you going to ask me where I got this injury?" Qinmu didn't speak. She lowered her eyes and didn't look at him. Zhou Chongguang didn't care about his face anymore. He wouldn't keep her in suspense. He said in a low voice, "Your brother came and beat me up." Of course, he left out the detail of him kneeling down. Chapter 2480. As she spoke, she struggled to get up, but her hand was caught by him and her body was pulled closer. She was in his arms. When she looked up, she saw his tense and embarrassed chin and his green stubble. Qin Mu's voice was a little cold. Zhou Chongguang, are you crazy? Let go of me. Yes, I'm going crazy. Zhou Chongguang's voice carried a hint of a growl. Then he hugged her and lowered his head to kiss her. Of course, Qin Mu was unwilling. After a moment of daze, she struggled desperately. She hit his shoulder with her little hands and shook her head hard, trying to get rid of him. However, the power of a man and a woman was so distinct. Not only could she not get rid of him, but he also pried open her lips and kissed her deeply. He was very eager, as if he was looking for something, as if he wanted to prove something. Just like that, he was eager to get her to respond. He used all his skills, but Qin Mu was still indifferent. When he opened his eyes, what he saw was her clear and cold eyes. She looked at him so coldly without moving her eyes at all. Zhou Chongguang suddenly sobered up, and then he smiled desolately. How could he be so naive to think that she would be willing to be touched by him? Mumu, I'll wait. He held her in his arms. You, wait for me, okay? Qin Mu was held so tightly in his arms that she could smell the smell of blood. She knew that he was not feeling well. It must be very painful. She said softly, Zhou Chongguang, it's not that I don't know what's good for me. I also know how you feel about me now. She paused for a moment and said in a softer voice, but you should also know that this matter can't be settled with me. Zhou Chongguang clenched his hands and said in a suppressed voice, I know, Mumu. I know. If you know, then let go. Qin Mu's voice sounded very cold. Then let's get a divorce, okay? Zhou Chongguang, I'm begging you. After she finished speaking, his body froze and his face was also shocked. Qin Mu begged him. He hadn't loved her then, and she hadn't begged him to love her. Now, they were in love, and she was begging him to let go. Every movement of his facial muscles was so twisted, so strange. He spoke very slowly, and every word seemed to knock on her heart. Qin Mu, unless I die, I won't let you go. Otherwise, I won't get a divorce. As soon as he finished speaking, a slap landed on his face. His face was bruised even more, but he did not seem to mind, and continued to look into her eyes. Zhou Chongguang, it's hard for me to love you again. Qin Mu said softly, softly. These words were a complete blow to him. His face was as white as paper, and his tall body swayed slightly. However, in the end, he only smiled gently and said, I'll go find a doctor. If there's nothing else, I'll bring you home. He paused for a moment before continuing, your brother has agreed to let me take you back. Even though the price is a little expensive, he thought to himself. Qin Mu was so angry that she was trembling. When Zhou Chongguang went out, Qin Mu immediately got up and wanted to leave, but there were already 2 men in black guarding the door. They said respectfully, Madam, Zhou Zong asks you to wait here for a moment. Qin Mu closed the door expressionlessly and returned to the bed. She knew that she couldn't leave. Of course, she could also call her brother, but she didn't want her brother to show up about her and Zhou Chongguang. In his eyes, Gume was extremely stupid. Was it meaningful to force a man who didn't love her to accept her and give birth to a child? Even if Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu couldn't be together in the end, that person would definitely not be Gume. Zhao Zi pursed his lips and started the car to leave first. This time was different from the last time. He didn't want to take advantage of the situation because Zhou Chongguang loved Qin Mu. On the second floor of the villa, Zhou Chongguang gently pushed open the bedroom door and saw Qin Mu packing her luggage. She moved quickly. A big box was filled with her belongings. She didn't take the clothes she bought after marriage. What she packed were some of her belongings when she was a girl. Chapter 2482. He walked over gently. Qin Mu was bending over to close the box when he hugged her from behind. Zhou Chongguang hugged her waist with his arms and buried his face in her neck. Mu, I'm sorry. Perhaps because this was their bedroom, he slid down to the carpet with her in his arms. He half knelt down and hugged her humbly. Qin Mu was held tightly by him and couldn't move at all. She raised her head and took a deep breath. Zhou Chongguang, don't think that kneeling is useful. If kneeling is useful, there's no need to forgive me. I know it's useless. His voice was deep. He buried his face and his lips were pressed against the skin of her neck, as if he was closer to her. His voice became deeper. Mumu, don't go. How do you think I can stay? Qin Mu suddenly broke free from him and half knelt down to look at him. Zhou Chongguang, I'm also a woman, and I have my own consciousness. It's fine if you don't love me, but if you have a child with someone else. She took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, but I can't continue. His dark eyes were filled with pain. I said that I would get rid of the child, even if I had to pay any price. Zhou Chongguang, what makes you think that I, Qin Mu, would be willing to follow a poor man? She looked straight at him and said cruelly. He wanted to hug her, but he was actually timid. That's it. Let's part on good terms. Qin Mu propped up one leg and wanted to get up. Zhou Chongguang's voice was gentle. Qin Mu, you can't leave. There are more than 10 bodyguards guarding this villa. Qin Mu's leg stopped and she looked at him. As he wished, he received another slap on his handsome face. This time, it was a solid slap. Qin Mu looked at him. You're despicable. Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips tightly. There was a faint trace of blood on his handsome face. It was Qin Mu who had hit him. Slowly, he forced a smile. Have you calmed down a little? Qin Mu was still staring at him, coldly spitting out 2 words. What do you think? Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything. He just looked at her with pain in his eyes. Suddenly, he took off his sweater. Qin Mu took a step back. What are you trying to do? Zhou Chongguang squinted at her. Apply the medicine. Do you want to clean it for me? Of course, Qin Mu wouldn't. She bit her lip and looked at him, not saying a word. Zhou Chongguang was only wearing trousers. He walked to the drawer and took out a tube of ointment. He took it over and applied it in front of the mirror. Qin Mu's gaze followed his movements and landed on him. Zhou Chongguang's expression wasn't very good because of the pain. After he finished applying it, he turned his head to look at Qin Mu and said calmly, It has nothing to do with you, does it? Qin Mu didn't say anything, then turned around and walked outside. He hugged her from behind again, and his whole body was covered in the smell of ointment. Mumu, I'm very scared. He buried his face in her neck and said in a low voice, Do you really not love me at all? His voice became hoarse. Tell me, what do I have to do to make you willing to stay and love me again? Qin Mu's body stiffened. After a long while, she turned her head and looked at him calmly. Do you think I can still love you? Zhou Chongguang tightened his arms and didn't say anything. He just stuck close to her. After enduring for a long time, Qin Mu finally couldn't help but say, Zhou Chongguang, have you had enough? Not enough. He suddenly turned her body around and kissed her lips hard. Chapter 2483. He kissed her fiercely, almost desperately. Qin Mu struggled, kicked him, and hit him, but it was useless. Zhou Chongguang seemed to have steeled his heart to flatten her no matter what. With a cracking sound, Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly and said in a trembling voice, Zhou Chongguang, do you know what you're doing? Her eyes were bloodshot, and her voice was filled with unprecedented despair. Don't make me hate you. He gritted his teeth. You already hate me now, don't you? As he said that, he was about to force her to come. Qin Mu closed her eyes and did not resist anymore. However, she did not give him any reaction. She lay under him as if she had lost her life, crying. Zhou Chongguang was shocked by that tear. His heart trembled, and his voice was hoarse and helpless. Qin Mu. Mumu, what's wrong with you? He reached out to wipe her tears, but she turned her face to the side and did not let him touch it. She twisted her face and said softly, Zhou Chongguang, I don't want to make love to you. Without love, what else can I do? He maintained the posture just now, and his expression was decadent. It seemed that the high-spirited Zhou Zong had disappeared in an instant. All that was left was disappointment. In the end, he left her body and did not force her. Qin Mu fell on the sofa, was picked up by him, and gently placed on the bed. He kissed her and said softly, I'll go downstairs and boil the medicine for you. At that moment, Qin Mu felt that the blood in her body had frozen. Did she still need to drink medicine now? She did not make a sound and just lay there quietly. And he felt that she was willing, so she was very obedient and did not make any more trouble. Zhou Chongguang reached out to rub her long hair and said in a low voice, Wait for me. He turned around and left, but he did not see the coldness in her eyes. After half an hour, Zhou Chongguang came over with a bowl of medicine. Qin Mu was still lying on the bed. He sat beside her and said softly, Mumu, I won't drink it. Qin Mu's voice was very light, and she turned her head to look at him. Zhou Chongguang's voice became gentler. Mumu, be good. He helped her up, but Qin Mu reached out and knocked the bowl out of his hand. The medicine was all over the floor, on the blanket, on his body, and on his face. The bitter medicine flowed down his cheeks bit by bit, making him look extremely pathetic. Qin Mu's heart was pounding violently. She looked at him and said, Zhou Chongguang, I said I don't want to drink anymore. Do you hear me? He still did not make a sound. Qin Mu's heart heaved violently. She looked at him, and then as if she had gone crazy, she smashed everything in the room that could be smashed. The sound of shattering came one after another, causing people to tremble in fear. However, Zhou Chongguang was still very calm and let her smash it. After smashing it, the bedroom was in a mess. She stood face to face with him, standing in the place where they used to be incomparably loving, but at this moment, it seemed that there was nothing but hostility. After a while, Zhou Chongguang squeezed out a smile. "Mumu, have you calmed down a little?" Qin Mu's voice was so hoarse that it was almost a low roar. "Zhou Chongguang, I've had enough." After saying that, her face was already covered in tears. She had never lost her composure like this, not even when she was about to get a divorce. Zhou Chongguang could hardly breathe. He wanted to reach out and hold her in his arms, but he did not move at all. Chapter 2484. Qin Mu screamed, "Zhou Chongguang, don't force me anymore. I'll die." He was stunned. After a long time, he asked her softly in a hoarse voice, "Mu, do you think you'll die if you're with me?" Qin Mu didn't say anything. She just looked at him with tears in her eyes. Zhou Chongguang made up his mind and narrowed his eyes. "Then let's die together?" With that, he picked her up and walked to the door. Qin Mu struggled, but he held her and said in a low voice, "If you don't want to get hurt, you'd better change to another bedroom." He carried her to the guest room and put her on the sofa. Qin Mu was still trembling. Her face was covered in tears, and she was only wearing a nightgown. Zhou Chongguang squatted down and carefully examined her bare feet. Then he looked up and said softly, "There's some broken glass on your feet." Qin Mu turned her face away. Obviously, she still didn't want to talk to him. Zhou Chongguang smiled gently. "I'll help you get the glass out. It might hurt a little. Bear with it." Qin Mu looked away. His eyes were locked on her, and then he lowered his head. He didn't want to use the needle to pick it up, but chose to suck the glass out with his mouth. When he did this, Qin Mu suddenly retracted her feet. Zhou Chongguang's fingers held her in place. He looked up with a meaningful gaze and then lowered his head again. He spat out the glass but didn't let go of her immediately. Instead, he continued to kiss her. Qin Mu's eyes narrowed and her body shrank back, but she couldn't break free at all. She couldn't help crying and calling him a pervert. Zhou Chongguang kissed her humbly. She didn't let him touch her, so he could only touch her feet. Yes, she was right. He was a pervert now. Zhou Chongguang didn't care. In the end, he sighed dejectedly. The soles of Qin Mu's feet were bleeding, mixed with his embarrassment. When their eyes met, she gave him another slap. His face was slightly red. Other than being hit by her, it was also because he felt uncomfortable. Since when had he, Zhou Chongguang, been in such a sorry state? He had actually done such a thing and was despised so much. After the fight, Qin Mu began to limp out. Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and reached out to hold her. "Are you crazy? Your foot is bleeding." Qin Mu's voice was low and hoarse. "It's nothing compared to before." He was speechless for a moment and then apologized in a low voice. "Mumu, I'm sorry." Qin Mu looked at him. "Do you think it's useful to say sorry? Otherwise?" His voice was as deep as water. "Otherwise, I'll let you go, Perhaps I'm fulfilling your wish." Qin Mu sighed. "Zhou Chongguang, perhaps what you want is a woman like Gu Mei, who treats you like the sky and gives in without principles." He frowned and stared at her without blinking. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Do you think so?" Qin Mu didn't answer. Zhou Chongguang laughed coldly. "Qin Mu, you think our relationship is nothing, don't you?" Her heart trembled. He asked again in a hoarse voice. This time, his voice was a little stern. "In your heart, it's nothing, right?" Qin Mu's lips moved, but in the end, she couldn't say a word. Chapter 2485. Qin Mu looked at him and said in a low voice after a long time, "What about you? What do you want me to do?" "Zhou Chongguang, tell me, what do you want me to do? Pretend that nothing has happened, continue to live together, continue to take the medicine, and continue to have children with you?" As she spoke, her face was covered with tears. "Aren't you being too much of a bully?" Zhou Chongguang couldn't deny this. He stepped forward and held her shoulder. "Mumu, it will definitely be solved. We will get better." He hugged her and said in a low voice, "As long as you are willing to forget these things, we will definitely get better." He paused for a moment. "If you don't want to have children for the time being, we can stop doing it, okay?" Now, as long as she didn't leave him, he was willing to do anything. Qin Mu pursed her lips and shook her head desperately. I don't know. Zhou Chongguang, let me calm down." Gu Mei, the child, she was caught off guard. At that time, her first thought was to leave him. She hit him and scolded him. She scolded him very harshly, but he didn't let go. Wouldn't it be better for everyone to be decisive? He held his child and had a complete family. Why bother pestering her? Qin took a step back and thought in despair that maybe she really didn't love him as much as she thought. So when something happened, she wanted to escape and not let herself get hurt. And she really didn't think about his position in this matter and his passive position in this matter. Was this the price he had to pay for what he had done in the past? Qin was stunned for a moment and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. He just raised his head and looked at him. A drop of tears in her eyes, a trace of softness in her eyes, softened his whole heart. His voice was gentle and hoarse. Mumu, you should have a good rest. Be good. He reached out to pick her up and carried her back to the bed. He checked her feet and finally went to wring a hot towel to clean her feet before carefully wrapping them with gauze. Qin was no longer able to resist. She lay down obediently and looked up at the ceiling. When he was done, he lifted his body and turned over. He held her little face with his big palm and kissed the corner of her mouth lightly. Mumu, be a good girl at home. I will solve the problem, With that, he buried his face in her hair and made no other movement. She raised her head and felt his light breathing. For a long time, she thought he was asleep, but he wasn't. After a long time, she heard his hoarse voice. Mumu, I can't lose you. I'll die too. Qin heart skipped a beat, and she couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. He lay with her for a while before slowly getting up. Qin heard the sound of him showering and the sound of the changing room door being opened. It was as if he was afraid of disturbing her. After about 10 minutes, Zhou Chongguang came out and stood by the bed. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, his eyes fixed on her little face. Qin closed her eyes and ignored him. Zhou Chongguang knew that she was awake, so he said in a low voice, I'll come back before noon to eat with you, As he said that, he gently brushed her little face with his hand. He felt that it was fluffy, like a child's, and his heart softened a little. But when he turned around, his heart hardened again. When the door closed, Qin's tears fell. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.